Welcome back to the Autoblog podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today is news editor Joel Stocksdale, coming to us with his dog. How's it going, man?
Good.
Cool. We have a great show for you today. We're going to talk about the Mercedes GLA 35. That's the AMG. Had a lot of fun just driving that car. I literally just got out of it about maybe 20 minutes ago. So that's a fun car. Hatchback, crossover sort of thing. Also talk about the Audi SQ7 a little bit. Many of you probably didn't even know that existed. Joel has spent some time in our long-term Hyundai Palisade, as have I, a little earlier in the year. So I'm very interested to hear your thoughts. We'll talk about Motorbella. That is sort of the Detroit Auto Show, such as it is this year in the fall. It was interesting this year, so we'll get into that a little bit. Talk about some of the things that were there, like the Tundra and the Expedition. And then finally, we will spend your money. But first, let's jump right into the Mercedes GLA 35 4MATIC. To me, this is a fun little hot hatch. It looks pretty good. It's, relatively diminutive, if you will, pretty small. The proportions are good, attractive. I drove the AMG version. Do you want to take a guess at how much the GLA 35 4MATIC costs, Joel?
I'm going to guess around $50,000.
All right, I'm going to read you a few options here. You tell me if you want to go up or down. 302 horsepower, turbo 4. So you probably knew that. That's a pretty ubiquitous engine. Had all sorts of, every electronic gizmo you can think. The lane departure that pushes you back onto the road. Beautiful leather seats. Beautiful blue paint on the outside. Deep blue metallic, black leather on the inside. Every AMG thing you can think of. Napa leather. Those big spokey wheels, if you will, they look really good. And when I open the doors, Mercedes crests light up my driveway. So you want to go up or down? Just curious.
Honestly, I kind of want to stay where I'm at. But
$63,000.
Okay.
As a little bit of sticker shock for me, simply because at one point the GLA and the CLA were the entry-level vehicles in the Mercedes lineup. Since then, the GLB has been added, and the A-Class have really rounded out this sort of like compact, subcompact area, which is, to me, it's very interesting. It seems like Mercedes is bringing some of its European strategy to the United States, which, it's a very German approach. I think it could work, especially if, maybe fuel prices go up in the near term. Hey, it's good to have to sort of flood the zone here. That being said, I think they have one too many vehicles in this area. I think the GLB is probably overall the strongest, most American car. And then you really don't need two sedans, the CLA and the A-Class. I feel like the A-Class is probably the stronger version, but I do like the CLA. So that leaves me with the GLA, which is, I would say, nominally a crossover. It's almost it's basically a hatchback, though. This to me feels more like a Mazda fighter. So, that's where I guess I would slot it. This specific car, I would say it's the right car for you if you need a small car, you're rich, you love AMGs, and you want to drive something that is really fun to drive. It's engaging, it's powerful, it sounds good, it has all the Mercedes gizmos, and it's a smaller car. So for $63,000, you can get a lot of Mercedes, larger Mercedes, for sure. But if you want a smaller car and you want everything, I guess this is your play. In some ways, it's, maybe this is just my Americanness. I struggle to put in place a $63,000 small hatchback. It's a little, there's just too much cognitive dissonance for me. But I mean, for what it is, it's outstanding at what it is. I would say the GLA, it's not as dialed in as, say, like the GTI or the Golf R, Volkswagen's hot hatches, or, other options out there like from Hyundai or Mazda. Steering's just a little bit lighter, but the chassis is pretty tight. We did a Target run last night, and my passengers were kind of like, hey, this is rough over these roads here in Michigan. This is a pretty tight chassis. So to me, it is a very enjoyable hot hatch. Yeah, it's a fun car overall. I think maybe I just that's where it is for me. It starts at $47,500. So, that's a little more palatable, but it's still not cheap. Let's put it that way. So I don't know. You've driven a lot of these smaller Mercedes over the years. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about the pricing, and well, what's funny is that now that yours is all optioned up, it actually uh well, it costs more than the GLA 45, which is also available, and that one gets the even more powerful four-cylinder. The 45, it gets the 382 horse four-cylinder, whereas the 35 gets the 302 horse one. Um, so if you are looking at these, you'll probably want to think long and hard about what what matters more to you, getting XYZ options or getting something that's actually significantly quicker. Um, but yeah, I've driven a few of these smaller ones. I don't think I've actually driven the 45 yet. I think I've only driven the 35 ones. Um, but I've enjoyed them. I think they're quite nice. And if you are a bit of a badge snob, these little Mercedes are probably the better choices. The Like, having talked with Zach and some of the other people that have driven like the BMW 2 Series sedan and things like that, haven't been all that impressed with them. The Mercedes certainly has a nicer interior, and it's kind of the same case on the Audi front. Like the A3 and things like that, so far have had kind of uh, disappointing accoutrements. Uh, so the Mercedes is a good way to go, and I mean you can get it in so many different flavors. You've got the regular A-class sedan, you've got the more coupe-like CLA, you've got the kind of rounded hatchback crossover GLA, and then you've got sort of the boxy looking GLB. Um, and the GLB, for reasons that I I'm still kind of shocked that they offer that with a third row seat. Um, it's such a tiny thing. I don't know who you're cramming in that third row. Um, but yeah, they're neat little vehicles. Uh, I do feel like the price is a bit high for what you get. Um,
It's tricky. You get everything in some ways, but it's like, do you want everything of this car? Is your use case, are your personal needs in a car this size? It's different because it's like in the US market, we tend to think, well, the more means you have, the larger of a vehicle you get. It's just you don't get a ton of US buyers who are like, yeah, I need a smaller car, but I'm gonna get the nicest smaller car I could get, smaller crossover. So um, that's where these things get a little, confusing, I think, for a lot of us. But I mean, you know, inside, like to your point, I think the Mercedes interior is the best in the segment. Like this interior is just beautiful with the ambient lighting, the leather, the screen, like right in front of you. Like everything is beautiful, deep, colorful screens. I was driving my son to school and I'm like, can look at how many G's I'm pulling as I make a left turn, which, is sort of superfluous information on random suburban street. But hey, good to know, right? So, I will say this: Mercedes in its small cars generally has like pretty good like layouts. There's a big center console for cups. You can put stuff in the middle. There's cup holders on the side, which in smaller cars, and sometimes larger cars, you see companies tend to struggle with that. So, you know, it's functional. It's fun. Like you, it's tough for me to believe the GLB has three rows, but hey, um, I think that just speaks to the broader trend of people want three rows, whether they need them or not, and whether they use them or not. I think a lot of people get three rows, and maybe you put the dog back there or one kid, and that gives you just a little more space that the second row has. So But, that's a GLA 35. A few years ago when we were talking about, more like 10 years ago, like just the proliferation of AMG, this is one that people would have been like, okay, so it's got a turbo 4-cylinder. You're putting it in your entry-level crossover. What are you doing there? That being said, to me, this is a really authentic hot hatch. I mean, like driving, it's a blast. And it's a handsome car. So the wheels are kind of tucked under. It's got the right stance. Like it's one of those things where the execution is definitely there. So I'm looking forward to driving it. I actually have a Jeep, I believe, Grand Wagoneer showing up today, and at first I was so excited about that, and I still am. I drove the Grand Cherokee L last week. This week, Jeep is rolling out again, the Grand Wagoneer over here too. And my first thought was like, yep, gonna get that right when it gets here. But I'm like, you know what? Make that the weekend vehicle. I'm gonna like maybe let the Mercedes run with that one more day. Just have some fun with it because it's a lot of fun. Plus, it's a pain to trade car seats. So there's that. But yeah, and I'm getting all these cars. This year I'm actually on the North American Car and Truck and Utility of the Year jury. Check out our post on the semifinalists that were revealed earlier this week at Motor Bella, which we're going to talk about in a little bit here. That's why I'm running my own personal fleet of cars here. It seems cars are coming and going, and definitely making the neighbors even more curious about what it is I do. So real quick on the SQ7, it's funny, the center console thing that just came stream of consciousness, that was a thing that really bugged me about the SQ7. So yeah, 8-cylinder, beautiful, expensive Audi, 3 rows, but you know what? The center console is not great. Like, it's just a small little area. There's barely any space to put your phone, your wallet, your keys, your hand sanitizer. There's just no room. Like, I just kept smushing it down. And you can adjust it to make the center console come out a little farther over this. I forget if it's a cell phone charger or just another like flat space. Because that's what I need to do. I need to extend the leather cover. Like, what is that? So not a fan of that. Otherwise, the things people probably care much more deeply about, it's an absolute rocket ship of a 3-row SUV. The tagline they have is more cylinders than seats. Okay, I can get on board with that. But it's fairly roomy in there. 500 horsepower. That seems pretty good to me. Torque 568. They say you can get to 60 in 4.3, which I would believe. Sounds good. Looks pretty good. Mine was bright red. If you want to make a statement in drop-off or running errands, pull up in an Audi SQ7 because it's also a relatively rare vehicle. Even you see plenty of like loaded up, whatever, Explorers, Expeditions, Navigators, Audis, Mercedes, wherever you might be, like those types of SUVs, you just see them. But like an SQ7, it's really a rare bird in my opinion, just because you don't generally see that kind of treatment to such a substantial SUV. It's pretty fun to drive. Handles pretty well. It felt like for a relatively big, crossover, it felt like relatively narrow. I don't know the dimensions off the top of my head, but it, for just sheer size, it handles pretty well. Far better than like any domestic SUV I've driven in this sort of category. It's cool. It's fun. If this is, again, how you want to spend your money, go for it. But I don't know. I mean, it's just I think it's a good Audi take on a very, segment that people are definitely looking at. It starts at, I think it's 86.5 is what the website says here. I don't have the sticker in front of me, but mine had a lot of stuff on it. Let me put it that way. But I mean, overall, it was a lot of fun. Drove it for a week. There is some space in the third row too, so that's kind of nice. Not like a ton of space, but you get back there and it's all right. I would also ding Audi for the seats. That's a thing with me. Like, I feel like these sort of like, they have quilting stitching patterns in them, but they were just these kind of like gray Audi seats that reminded me of the same seats I drove in like, the S4 or S5 like 10 years ago. It didn't feel like, ooh, like the GLA's seats do, I guess. Let me put it that way. Or even some of the really nicer interiors you see from Lincoln. So don't need to hit on this too much, but I don't know. It's a fun, large three-row SUV. And that segment, to your point, is becoming ubiquitous. Have you driven anything like this recently, Joel?
Well, so I think I actually drove an SQ7 late last year.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I also thought it was a really nice SUV. Um, really quick. It's like, I mean, as you would expect from a 500 horsepower SUV. But the it it's got a really strong mid range from what I remember, so it feels like more muscular than some other 500 horsepower engines. Um, I guess because I mean it is turbocharged, and with that strong mid range, it's you don't have to build up to that high horsepower number, high on the RPMs. It just kind of slams you when you really want it. Um, and it's a way to get uh, a surprisingly capable, sporty SUV. Um, just looking on the website, it's got a 7,700 pound towing capacity, and I believe you can get it with a third row seat. Um, I think if I'm don't quote me on this because I know that there have been like updates to Cayenne and things like that, but I believe the Q7 is still based on the same platform as like Porsche Cayenne and Bentley Bentayga and things like that. But it is slightly long. It's slightly lengthened to accommodate that third row. Um, so it is kind of a way to get like a really stealthy, really practical, sporty crossover. So I guess I don't know if you've got a family and you're wealthy, but you can't quite convince your significant other to let you get a fancy sports car, this is a good way to kind of sneak that into the garage.
I think I would probably go Cayenne if I were going to pick among those three, just as far as like what I'd be looking for. But I will say this, the SQ7 did remind me just how cool Audis can be. You know, you roll up with those four rings on the hood. Yeah, I mean, Audis can be very cool and sporty, let's put it that way, even in three-row SUV form. Speaking of three-row SUVs, what's going on with our long-term Hyundai Palisade?
Well, to be completely honest, I haven't driven it a whole lot since it's arrived.
Ah,
In partly because I've recently upgraded the clutch in the Beetle, and I'm trying to reach the 500-mile break-in period for that. So I've been just trying to rack up kind of stop and go miles in it to get that broken in. But I've driven it a little bit, uh, and actually, this is the first time that I've had it since it's been in our long-term fleet. And I mean, my first impressions, I can get why our green editor John Snyder bought one. It's a really nice big crossover. It's really quiet. The engine makes good power, and it's smooth and it's well isolated. Um, the interior is really nice. This one is really well equipped. It's got nice kind of parchment white leather, and it's got the um, faux suede headliner inside it. Um, I mean, it's got pretty much every option you could want. Uh, there is one thing that I feel very split on, and that's the faux wood trim.
hmm.
And I like the color and kind of the pattern of it. It's this very kind of pale white stain kind of look to it with sort of like little black pinstripes. And I think it looks really nice, and it matches kind of the light gray parchment leather interior. But when you touch it, and even when you look at it closely, it's very clear. It's just uh, like printed vinyl kind of wrapping. Like it's clear that it is not real, and it bugs me because like everything else in this interior is really really nice, and it I, I don't know, it just it bothers me. It's like, and I think maybe part of it is that some of the competition is definitely raising its game. I had a Mazda CX-9 a couple months ago. It was one of the top level trims, and it had really very nice real wood trim in it, and like uh, GMC with some of its like AT4 and like and Denali models adding like real wood trim and things, and uh, it just it feels like a weird kind of I don't know, just kind of a weird oversight that everything else is super super nice in there, and then kind of one of the more prominent accents is pretty clearly fake. Um, but again, like the color and pattern of it does fit the interior nicely. So it's one of those things where it's like I like the look of it. I just wish it was real, not fake. Um, or just like a slightly more convincing fake. Honda actually has done some really nice fake wood trim um, over the past few years. So I don't know. I guess if you can make the fake convincing enough, I don't mind it. But this kind of sticks out. Um, but it's also just kind of it's also one of the uh, only real complaints I have about it right now, because everything else about it is so nice. It's so comfortable. It's so quiet. It handles pretty decently. It's got a good engine and transmission. Like I really have like almost no complaints about it, at least at the moment. But I guess maybe that's why this kind of stands out to me. It's like everything else is so good, and then there's like this one nail that didn't quite get pounded in right.
It's interesting. So I did a piece on the interior earlier this summer, and I like the calligraphy trim. I think it looks pretty good. For that, it's basically like I think the headliner and the quilted like hexagonal like sort of leather stuff you get in there. I like the wood. It was fine with me. I think upon further review, and I will still say this, I like it right now in 2021. Um, to me, I guess I also sort of like I didn't expect that to be real wood. Like in a Volvo, maybe it's real wood. You mentioned like GMC and Mazda going with the real wood. To me, that's actually a little surprising, even on the higher trims. Like those are such like mass market brands that you don't generally expect to see the real wood enter into the equation. Not to harp on this too much, but for me, I guess I was like, yeah, it looks pretty good. It's probably not real, but I could go with it. But to somewhat contradict myself, or maybe overanalyze this, do you remember the Nissan Murano from like 14, 15, somewhere in there? They had those, we had a long termer, and it had white seats that basically melt. They looked beautiful, but if you wore a pair of jeans, they would like melt into the fabric or vice versa. It was not good. And it had acres of this like beautiful, like I forget what the pattern was. I want to say it was almost like a pearl or marble thing, but it was clearly plastic. And I remember at the time I liked it, but then I got in one later. I was like, oh, geez, this was maybe okay at 15, but not okay now. So this might be an area where I think Hyundai could probably at like a relatively minimal cost sneak some real value in there, and then be like, hey, look, in a Palisade, maybe a Genesis too, but in a Palisade, a Hyundai Palisade, you do get some real wood, and don't raise the price, because like don't pass that extra couple $100 on to the consumer, and then hey, you're continuing to chase value and offer a very premium offering. So
Yeah, well,
that's how I look at it.
and I wouldn't expect this for every Palisade trim, um, but we've got the like top level calligraphy trim,
Yeah.
Um, it's got the quilted leather and the faux suede headliner and 20-inch wheels. It's got all the fixins. Um, and I don't know, it comes so close to like being completely convincing that it is an even more expensive vehicle than it is. Uh, I would just like to see that last little bit finished off a little nicer. Well, and like I said, if they just do a more convincing fake wood, I don't think I think I think I would actually probably be okay with that. Um, it just needs that last little bit of polish.
All righty. Let's let's shift gears over to Motorbella. You attended this week here at M1 Concourse. That's a club track sort of event here north of downtown Detroit. It's a relatively new facility. Owners actually have garages where they put their Porsches and Corvettes and any other car for that matter. It's a pretty cool place. We've done video shoots there. We've tested cars there. It's it's pretty cool. It was pretty close to our old office actually. Anyways, it was the site of Motorbella, which is sort of like a festival of speed, if you will, slash outdoor auto show slash placeholder for the North American International Auto Show this year. A lot of things kind of happened that made this happen, if you will. I feel like they probably would have done it anyway, even with NIAS, as it's known by its acronym around here. Um, but without, the Detroit show happening, it's interestingly, they're actually both put on by the same organizers, something to note. Um, I think they would have done it anyway, but that allowed it sort of to step into the the lurch, if you will. It'd have like an actual somewhat of a press day, a press preview, kind of to me, like just sort of organizing and planning for it. It felt like the run up to a Detroit auto show, but then it was actually much different on the ground, if you will. So, I mean, what'd you think of it? How did it feel?
Well, I mean, I was a little bit skeptical about how things were going to go. And going in, we knew that there were only like two big reveals, the Toyota Tundra and refreshed Ford Expedition. Um, and just not really sure what the like manufacturer participation is going to be like. But getting there, um, it was actually pretty neat. And one of the big things that was really cool about it was having vehicle demonstrations that were a lot more dynamic than what you get at most other auto shows. Because at a lot of auto shows, they have added kind of dynamic displays. Jeep almost always has like an off-road section where you can go for a ride in a Wrangler or something around this kind of tight obstacle course in the convention center and stuff. But moving outside and at like an actual racetrack facility, automakers really went all out. Stellantis, like one of the first things that you saw going over to M1 Concourse's facilities were just enormous mounds of dirt and a lot of the construction vehicles that had been brought out to set up these giant dirt obstacle courses for the Jeeps and also for Ram. That they had a dirt track set up for the Ram TRX and were taking people out in that and actually getting air. Our editors, Zach Palmer and also John Snyder, they went for a ride in one of those TRXs, and so got to experience a little bit of that airtime. And even if you weren't in it, it was cool to just hear this big rumbling V8 followed by a multi-ton pickup truck going through the air. And in other parts, Ford had a huge display, again with another little obstacle course and an area to ride around in their electric vehicles, Mustang Mach-E. And they had a Lightning prototype there during the press days. I don't know if they'll have that around during the public days, but that was neat. And while I was there in the morning, Toyota was looping some of its race cars and some custom cars around kind of a blocked off section of the road course. And it was just fun to see just cool vehicles just being outdriven and not just a static display. And I think it's stuff that would really appeal to just public goers. I think this is something that would really kind of uh, reinvigorate sort of public opinion and interest in going to auto shows, because it's not just cars parked in a building, it's getting to actually see them out and about and doing stuff. It's not to say that there weren't things that could have been a little bit nicer. It kind of seems like the automakers that actually put some work into their displays, like they normally would, were GM, Ford, Stellantis, and Toyota for the most part. And then a lot of the other vehicles, I think, were mainly provided by like the local dealer associations. And so they didn't really have fancy displays or anything. It was basically a couple of the cars parked along the main walkway on the course, with like a flag next to them. So it felt a little bit thin on kind of the manufacturer support, but I think part of that may have to do with, I mean, the current pandemic going on and the fact that this was going to be a smaller event than a normal Detroit show too. So it's one of those things where I think if it were to expand like in the next few years and get a little bit more manufacturer support, I think having kind of large outdoor sections is really appealing. I think it's pretty neat. Um, so overall, I actually had a pretty positive outlook on this whole thing. Um, Granted, weather is an issue. Just so happened that they were having it the week that we would have some of the worst rain that we've had all summer. And actually, yesterday, they canceled the remaining press events because of flooding and damage to displays and stuff. Because what, in the last like 36, 48 hours, we've had like almost nonstop rain.
I'll say this, picking the third week of September, literally the week that it changes from summer to fall, is probably the best window you can get in Michigan, hoping for good weather. Anything later, like right now, it's like 55 degrees, it feels like fall. Last week, like, or 2 weeks ago, I'm pretty sure we still went to the pool. Like, and it was super hot. And an outdoor auto show when it's like 85 and the sun's blistering down on you, that's not going to be everybody's, flavor of brandy either. So, I mean, I think they took a good swing at the weather and, just thinking about the venue. I mean, the venue is very cool, but also just the outdoor experience. I think, kind of walking around a relatively like, open place where you can sort of savor the cars is a cool idea. I think it's also cool to be indoors under the bright lights where they make the cars look as cool as they possibly can, like they do at like Kobo or Javits or any place they would obviously indoor convention centers. Um, so I mean I don't know. I think they took a big swing at this, and I'm excited to see what happens next. I actually would hope that whether or not there's like two auto shows in Michigan or whether there's like this fall speed festival with some like dealer support, OEM support, then there's like more of a traditional North American show. Like this to me is something that should continue in some form, like do this and then figure out, and maybe this evolves into the North American International Auto Show. Who knows, like a big part of that is the media. It's very prestigious because car companies send their top executives, they reveal cars there. In the last couple of years, we've seen people doing virtual reveals, reveals on Hulu, TikTok. Like you don't need to have 1,000 journalists in a basement of, I think it's actually called the TCF Center now, to show your product to the world. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. And this to me is a very like working prototype for how auto shows could evolve. And the Expedition and the Tundra were both there. You probably got to look at them. What'd you think?
Yeah, so those were kind of the main reveals. The Tundra was the biggest one. Trying to think if it was literally the biggest one. It's probably close. Expedition is pretty big too. Um, and yeah, they had Well, let's see. They only actually had really one version of the Tundra on display, which was kind of a surprise. I would have figured they would have, and it wasn't the TRD Pro version that they had on display. It was the limited trim, I believe. Um, which I've always thought it's a little bit funny that limited is like a high end trim, because in like writing or speaking, limited would tend to be a negative thing. But I digress. Um, the the Tundra, I actually think it looks kind of cool. I totally get why there are people that don't like it. The grill is a lot, um, but this is a segment where grills tend to be a lot. Um, and I actually do like the proportions of it. It doesn't look like a lot of modern pickup trucks look very tall and kind of chunky, and not in a good way. Bulky is the word that I'm looking for. The Tundra actually looks a little bit leaner. It looks like it's kind of got a little bit longer nose, and it doesn't look quite so thick between kind of like the floor and like the door sill, and like the window sills and things. Um, in some ways, it kind of looks like a scaled up Toyota Tacoma. Um, and it's got a lot of impressive stuff. They've ditched V8s altogether and have just gone with a twin turbo V6 in either just conventional internal combustion form or as a hybrid. And the hybrid has class leading torque for a gas engine in the segment, which is impressive. Um, Oh, and the other big thing that I'm glossing right over is that the Tundra has also gone to coil spring rear end instead of leaf springs. And yet, with all of that being said, part of me feels a little bit like Toyota has just like caught up with the competition as opposed to uh, leapfrogging it or anything. Um, and the reasons I say that are, well, it's not the first truck to go to coil spring rear suspension. Ram has done that for years now. The previous generation, Ram 1500, had coil spring rear suspension. And as for hybrid, well, Ford is doing that too, and Ford goes beyond just trying to improve fuel economy with it. You also get the perk of being able to run power tools and stuff off of it without necessarily running the truck, which is really nice. And um, you can even, I mean, it comes in handy if you've had a power outage. There were all those stories about down in Texas, people with their hybrid F-150s basically using them as generators to run their appliances and stuff. Um, it's just such a brilliant feature that it's like, man, it's awesome. And it's hard to think of like, oh, I've got a giant battery in my pickup truck, like what are other ways we could use it? It seems like such a no-brainer, and it's a little bit weird to not see anything like that on the Tundra hybrid. So I don't know. It's obviously going to be a vast improvement over the old Tundra, because the old Tundra was really truly ancient. Like it had been around for over a decade at this point. Um, and when the full size truck market receives as much attention and innovation as it does in the US from American automakers, that age shows up a lot more. Because I feel like I uh, have kind of maybe let the Nissan Frontier get a bit of a pass, but part of that is because the compact pickup truck segment didn't move as far in like all the time that the Frontier had been sticking around. Because they're still kind of building those to a price point and can be a little bit more on the rough and tumble side, but the full-size pickup truck market is, in a lot of ways, a cost is no object thing because they're so profitable. So they can do a lot of work to refine them, to advance them. And so, I don't know, the Tundra feels a little bit like it is now fully caught up with the American trucks, but it makes me a little bit worried about its competitiveness long term. Because one of the other things is that maximum towing and payload on the Tundra are below that of all of its American competitors. Not by a huge amount, but I don't know. It's one of those things that it's like I guess I was expecting after so long something that might leapfrog the competition and be competitive for another like 10 years. Whereas with this, I'm kind of, well, I'm hoping that Toyota is open to the possibility of more innovation in the next like 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's a very solid execution. I like how it looks, but it also to me feels like when you break down all the features and attributes and metrics, still feels like it's like roughly the fourth place truck, behind Ram, F-150, Silverado, whatever. Sierra could go in there, however you want to put it, but it's like roughly the fourth like place truck in there. I think that's how I break it down. Still ahead of the Titan, but that's about it. But solid, looks good. Significant reveal at Motor Bella. Real quick, any expedition thoughts?
Oh, right. Oh, and one last note on the Tundra. Of course, it also comes down to, I mean, we won't know for sure where it ranks until we drive it. It could be that it is an absolutely fantastic truck, and and on the road and off the road, it might it might blow away the competition. But right now, based on the numbers, based on everything else, yeah, it doesn't really seem like kind of a class leader for sure. But anyway, on to Expedition. It gets a really light facelift for the most part. Slightly tweaked on the outside. It's got new LED headlights. On the inside, it's a little bit more interesting. They've updated the interior. It now comes with, I think, about a 12-inch standard infotainment display, and you can get an optional 15-inch one that's taken out of the Mustang Mach-E. So that really big vertical tablet with the little floating volume knob in the middle. And kind of the bigger news is the introduction of 2 new trim levels. The more interesting of them is the Timberline, which is the kind of off-road oriented Expedition trim level. And it follows in the footsteps of the Explorer Timberline. It's got the slightly tweaked front rear fascias. It's got orange highlights. Um, it's got tow hooks, and it's got the requisite badging and stuff. But it also comes with some nice off-road upgrades. It's got a limited slip differential at the rear for additional traction. It's got all-terrain tires that measure about 33 inches. Um, it is the highest ground clearance of any Expedition. It's got 10.6 inches of ground clearance. It comes with extra drive modes, and it also has the trail turn assist function from the Bronco, where it can lock up one of the inside wheels so that you can execute a super tight turn on loose surfaces. Oh, and it's got skid plates off of the F-150 Raptor. Um, so it's actually pretty well equipped for off-roading. And you can also get it with a cool, like super dark green leather upholstery, which I think is pretty neat. Um, and it comes with the twin turbo 3.5 liter V6 that makes 440 horsepower and 510 pound feet of torque. So it's actually really a pretty neat trim level. And I think is a good option to have, especially when uh, you've got the Chevy Tahoe Z71 and the GMC Yukon AT4. Pardon me, I've just developed a little bit of hiccups. Um, As for the other trim level, there's the it's a new package for the Expedition Limited called the Stealth Edition Performance Package. It's not the most eloquent name, especially if you were to read out the entire make, model, trim, and package, which would end up being Ford Expedition Limited Stealth Edition Performance Package. But
if you're gonna put stealth in the name, just do stealth and leave it there.
yeah. It does. The appearance definitely does live up to the stealth name. It's kind of a blackout appearance package. So the badges are black, the grille is black, the mirror caps are black, the wheels are black with just a little silver outline. The interior is black leather, but with red contrast stitching. And actually, the brake calipers are painted red too. They're big wheels. They are 22 inches. But the performance part of it comes in with the fact that it gets adaptive suspension that's tuned for more sporty handling and stuff. And it also gets that 440 horsepower V6 like the Timberline. But it's a good looking package. And if you want slightly sportier on-road handling, it's not a bad way to go. It's a nice alternative to Chevy Tahoe Rst, which is a very similar kind of sportier street performance SUV. I wish that they had gone with some kind of different name for it. I mean, I would have even accepted like ST line as like, it's sporty, but it's not full on ST. But that's kind of nitpicking. It's an appearance package that comes with a little bit of performance upgrade. It's perfectly fine. But it's also not a big deal. Kind of the big news from Expedition is the Timberline trim.
Cool. The Expedition is a very hulking vehicle. It's also lucrative. They sell a good amount of them. I think making some sort of tweaks like this and, showing them at, kind of an auto show like setting is a good move for Ford. Yeah, let's leave it there. Spend some money. All right. Carl writes to us. Good news. My son got into the school he wanted to study aviation. Congratulations. That's awesome. Bad news, it's a commuter college, which means he now has a 60-mile round-trip drive. He currently has an 88 Subaru Xt6, forgot about this car, which he loves but doesn't want to beat it up on the near daily drive. Can you suggest something that's used that will get good mileage and be reliable, that his 6'2", 210-pound frame can fit into, preferably around $15,000? Good question. It sounds like a very fun 88 Subaru to be rolling around in for starters. I'll jump right in. I'll take this one for starting, and I always want to hear what Joel says because he always is, I think, our best spend my money person. Two choices here. I think you look at like maybe a 2015-ish Honda Civic, or maybe a Honda CR-V, which is, a little bit bigger, also in that same vintage, 2013, 14, 15. And, I think those would be reliable, comfortable, relatively nice, modern commuter cars. The CR-V is going to give you a little bit more space. Obviously, for somebody who's 6'2", that probably isn't the play. But a Honda Civic, it's a good car. It's going to run. You could probably sell it again, flip it, and still have some value, some equity in it. Maybe somebody else in the family might want it. I think those are both very safe, conservative plays that, I don't think you're going to go wrong with that. So with that, I'll toss it over to you, Joel.
Yeah, honestly, I can't really argue with that. I mean, either of those would be an excellent choice. And yeah, it's really hard to it's really hard to offer much else. And actually, like the Civic, you can get the hybrid version and get really excellent fuel economy, excellent reliability, and something that's perfectly roomy. I think really maybe the only other thing I might suggest is like a Prius or a Camry hybrid, both of which are going to be really really economical, really reliable, and both of which should be plenty roomy for someone that's pretty tall. And I mean, that's really what you're looking for, is like fuel economy and reliability, because he's already got a really cool car for fun. The Subaru Xt6 is a wild looking little thing. Super wedgy and kind of like peak 1980s design. It's really cool. It's neat that he's got that. But yeah, I mean, we don't have very exciting choices here, but that's not necessarily what you're looking for when you've got a 60-mile commute.
I will just echo your thoughts. That is really peak 80s, like wedge shaped design. Very, very cool. I've been really getting into some of those like wedge shaped, like almost transformer vehicles, like everything from the Countach and so on, back from, the 70s and 80s recently. But yeah, probably think Honda. Let us know how you end up with this, Carl, and thanks for writing. Everybody else, thank you for listening. It's been a fun show this week. If you're in Michigan, check out Motor Bella. It's still going on, and you're listening to this podcast in relatively recent timing, real time, if you will. Send us your Spend My Monies. That's podcast@autoblog.com. We'll see you next week. Be safe out there.